Hi guys. All right, so I have 9 questions on here too. They kind of touch on different things. Short is best, but feel free to take your time. Either of you can answer or both. It doesn't really matter to me. But the first thing I always ask too is, who are you and what do you do?
Together we are Hand Hewn Farm, and we teach people about how to appreciate good food, but also run them through the process of processing pigs and beef and getting to the point where they can see the whole process from beginning to end.
And then what would you say is, for both of you, or for Hand Hewn though, but what's the prime directive?
Reconnecting agriculture and high food culture. It should never have been disconnected as it has been. And so we're trying to bridge that gap.
So historically, how is butchery kind of like a connecting point between past and present?
I mean, I think like a lot of human endeavors, there's a progression of knowledge through time. And so it's interesting with butchery because there's always been a knowledge of animals and animals as food. And the butcher's been kind of the person that sort of disseminates that information to the mass in some ways, like through the meat or whatever they cook or cut. So that's kind of an interesting one. But over time, you know, agriculture changes and the butchers have kind of had to adjust to who they're serving to. I don't know if that really answers the question exactly, but it's an interesting idea to think about how butchery has been woven through time. I don't know that I put a lot of thought into that one as far as how that works, but I think it's a lot of the same ways that anything develops together, you know, the animals and the butcher, and then on the other end the consumer, how those change. But I feel like we've sort of stepped back at least a couple generations in how we're intersecting with butchering itself. We're not in any way modern or formal butchers. So personally, it's made us have to step back a little bit to see what other cultures and people have done before us. So we've had to reference it a little bit differently than I think professionally trained butcher would, just because we've kind of done it from the ground up without formal training. I don't know if that answers your question. But.
Well, it's also fascinating that animals aren't raised for any other reason but food. And the farmer, the one raising the animals, doesn't really have anything to do with that food product.
Right.
They're responsible for the front end. And then the consumer doesn't want to know that this chicken breast or drumstick or pork chop came from an animal. So the butcher is like the nexus where these two worlds meet. But I don't know that it ever should have been that way in the first place. If we're gonna, we're all gonna eat. We're all gonna eat. Yeah. I mean, just period. And we all have to know where our food comes from, one way or the other. And so what we do is we just try to connect people that either raise the animal or want to know more about food to what is possible culinarily, which is a whole other direction.
I've always seen it funny because it's like people want to see the trilogy film, mm-hmm. right? But they only want to watch the third, mm-hmm. the final, the crescendo of it. And sometimes they're getting interested in the beginning part of it, but they'll skip the middle. And like bread and butchery are kind of, or grain, you know, you have to have like the farmer growing it, the miller milling it, mm-hmm. and the baker baking it. So usually that's not the same person. Right. And it's the same thing in meat a lot of the time. So to me, at least, it feels like you guys are kind of trying to tell a whole, I mean, I know we talk about nose to tail, you know, like from pasture to plate or whatever terms we use for it, but it's filling in the gaps in a story that has to be told every time. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's weird how we've just tried skipping all of it. Yeah. Right? Like,
well, the people that come to our workshops, they think they're going to get a practical or pragmatic how-to. Like, this is where you cut. This is what it becomes. As though this is linear. It's not linear. Like there's nothing about it that's linear. It's all, if it's not intuitive, it's there's some cultural appropriation that needs to take place. Like, what have the people before us done with this animal? And that's the other thing. That's our other charge, is introducing people to new possibilities.
Well, and all food is cultural appropriate.
Yeah,
I always bring that up. It's the funniest thing of like, that's our dish. I'm like, if I look back far enough, those peppers
Where
weren't.
did those spices come
Yeah, those weren't from out here. You were lucky enough to have them, and that kind of feeds into one of these other ones that I was curious about too. Is, say this is a story that people are going through as they come into these workshops and they get to experience everything. What's the aha moment or the inspiration moment you find most people having?
Oh, it's obviously different with different people, but I think the earliest one they get is when we pause and slow down before we kill the pig. A lot of people aren't ready for that. And they think that part is going to be harsh or grotesque or something. And when we stop and talk about how we're going to do it and read a poem that hopefully feels reverent, and we put everyone on the same page, I think that's the first point where people say, oh, this is different. I would have never thought to do it this way. But they appreciate it. I mean, pretty much across the board, even if they're not going to take the shot of bourbon with us, just the slowing down and that sort of ritual of saying these words in a way that people can receive them. We're not just like, hey, we're going to say this real quick. It's a very slow thing. And that really has nothing to do with pig butchering or anything we're doing that weekend outside of the fact that it's a group of people pausing for a moment to think about what's happening next. So I think that's one of them. I don't know.
Yeah, the next is when we tell them there's no right or wrong way to butcher, that this is all food.
Yeah.
And if they came here expecting, like, you need to cut here and you need to cut here and don't do this, they're expecting that, like, pen in hand, notebook out, camera ready. But when we kind of shift the paradigm a little bit and let them know that this is all food, and that if you were to screw it up terribly, you end up with more sausage. Like that also is like a little bit of a sea change. For the frame of mind.
Yeah.
That's where you get into where it's there's an art versus a science, right?
Mm-hmm.
And having an art form of something rather than a science. Hey. Another big thing too is for folks that have not experienced that before. Oh, you're good. Just lean it back up on there.
Turn it around the other way.
Awesome.
It'll be good. I'll get it real quick. I'm just gonna move this guy real quick. You did a good job though.
You could probably edit it.
I can totally edit it. You can edit it.
Yeah.
like
You can
that.
fix that, right?
That's what so many people tell me when I film stuff, and then they're like, you can fix all this in post, right? I'm like, I can't make you eloquent, but sure, I can do other things.
I am a wizard.
Yeah.
AI.
So what do you say to somebody who has never considered the origins of their food? And how does this workshop change their perspective?
What do we say to them?
Yeah, because I mean, you're saying different people have different experiences, but for those that come in, it's very transformative.
It is. We don't get in front of many people that have never thought about that.
Okay.
Yeah, that's true.
To be fair to us, like that's a tough question because most people that are coming to these things are coming with some expectation that there's a live pig involved, and so they've already connected at least.
Or they're
a couple
taking the
dots.
workshop at a farm.
Yeah, so I don't know that I've run into many people. I don't know that I've run into any people at a workshop like this that hasn't crossed their mind. So I don't know how to answer that part of the question.
Yeah.
We do say though, like we get the animal rights / humanitarian perspective, like because they have every reason to believe that the industry is not good. The practices are not good. There is innumerable ways that it could be done better.
Yep.
And if you choose to not eat animal proteins because you don't want to be like complicit in that, like I actually respect that.
Mm-hmm.
We also feel like what we are doing and the way we are doing it is the counterpoint that they didn't know existed.
Right. I do this all the time where I tell people about people that I know, these animals live better lives than most people's pets. They have one really bad day.
No, not in our world. That animal didn't have a single instant.
But that's what I mean.
It's like, it's out. There's no fear, there's no anxiety, like there's not a bad day. Like, we should be so lucky as to be walking around and then lights out.
Yeah, because you even told me we go out to the space where they're at. And, right. But it is that idea, too, that even in those last moments, too, it is a way of respecting, appreciating. And that's why I talk about this all the time. Get people to eat less meat, but higher quality when you do. Yeah. And we have an overconsumption. So it's funny having all this, but I once talked to PETA because I told them, I was like, I think I can do your job better than you. And what I was telling them was, let me do these tours where people go out, butcher, baker, candle maker. You know, they go out to a U-pick, they go out to, but one of the stops is they go out to a farm, they see a chicken killed as humanely as possible. Let people decide for themselves once they see that. I never want to be around this again. Or what I usually find happens is they never waste another, like, then they start asking, like, how do I make stock? How do I start using these other pieces? And you have more reverence for what you're taking and putting something back. So a lot of people are discovering things at these workshops, and one of you mentioned that you're always learning new things. What's like a recent discovery you've had in the world of pig?
I was just telling them about it before I walked over here. Super nerdy, but it's what happens in aged hams that create the flavor that is so unique to them. And I've been reading all these scientific articles about a process called proteolysis, and I'm not going to go into it right now because
but
it's the breakdown of the proteins that create these volatile and non-volatile compounds. So some of the breakdown creates amino acids that are volatile, so when you slice into it, they're released so you can smell them. And then some of the non-volatile ones are the ones that actually give it that strong umami flavor. And so it's interesting because, like, historically, like, the Romans, when they were curing hams, didn't know about proteolysis. They knew they liked the outcome. So I think it's fun that we're doing these old things and now just catching up to, like, why does it taste like this? And there's actually research that goes into it. So it's kind of a fun melding of old and new and science and art and all that sort of stuff.
How that comes together.
That's my new one.
What's your new one?
If I hadn't had proteolysis, this would be a tough one.
It's a tough one, because it's a small thing, probably.
New for us.
Or a recent experiment.
We're almost always experimenting and almost always coming up with
there's stuff that came out of
some way to make something better. Every culture has their tradition or a heritage, and rarely was that written down. For one thing, it was almost always word of mouth, and also what you did in your village was what they did in the next village. It certainly wasn't what they did in another country or culture. So trying to figure out how to sometimes marry those, the best of both worlds. But as far as a specific example, boy, I'd have to think on it, or it'll come to me later. But
it actually kind of epitomizes the question. The whole idea of that one, though, is that, I mean, I talk about this with farming, but it's called a practice. Like, you never really master it, and it's right. And the same thing feels like butchery and other things too. You don't really, you're always learning, and so I think it's something when a lot of the times people have this apprehension towards digging into something like, I'd have to take like years of, you got to mess up.
10,000 hours.
Flight training or something like that. What does it mean to know your meat today? Where do you guys think the standard should be?
Oh, where the standard should be. That's interesting. Well, that's a tricky one. I'm also quick to, as much as I have kind of committed my life to teaching people how to do this on their own, I also am well aware of the tens of millions of people that live in urban centers. And I recognize that that's not a possibility. And so it's hard for me to hear a question like, what should the standard be to know your meat, when I know that 10, 12 million people in New York City can't know their farmer. Like, that's just not an option or feasibility. And so at that point, it just becomes a feasibility thing. What is feasible and what is sustainable? Like, what makes the most sense? And you already alluded to it, just overconsumption, but eat less meat, eat better meat. If you can find a local butcher shop and work directly with them, those local butcher shops work directly with farmers. So they're the conduit between you, the consumer that lives in the urban center, and the people that raised the thing in the first place. And I would encourage that minimally.
Yeah.
If you're going to eat meat, and most people do, you should at least find out where it came from. And you don't have to go to the farm. You don't have to have a knife in your hand.
Right.
But you can know the butcher that is selling you the quarter or the cut, and they can tell you at least where the farm is, who it was. The farm has a website. They've got a "Who Are We" or "About Us" page, and I don't think that's all swill and marketing. I think the farmers are desperate to be known, and the local butcher shop is a really good conduit for that relationship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so good.
Yeah, and it's a funny one too, because that's I hate, to be honest, what I do sometimes, right? The storytelling, that aspect. But it is really funny because I used to have those aha moments where somebody at a bar in DC once, I was working on my computer editing some photos, and she walks over and she at first went like, "Is that a goat?" And I was like, "No, it's a cow." And that's where the conversation started. And it got to this point, I don't know why I referenced it, but I said a box cutter. I was like, so if I took a box cutter, like a blade, and I cut the stomach of that cow open, what do you think would come out? And she started describing cow patties as like six packs, kind of. Like that it would, well, but it brought up something to me too. It was never right to condemn anyone for not knowing. That person has never grown up anywhere near a farm.
Yep.
It wasn't a part of the school education. It's actually not that.
Not something you see on television.
Yeah, it's sad as a whole, but not for that individual person, and not to condemn or make fun of anybody for not knowing. But then it's this whole big mission of, all right, how do we bridge some of these gaps? Because the less people care and the less people know, ignorance being bliss, the more things go downhill in terms of quality, because nobody's watching or caring.
Yeah.
So even getting people to ask their butcher, and there aren't many, at least there's one butcher shop for like a city of, what is that, like 47,000 people?
That's wild. That's a wild statistic.
Right. Well, I'm sure there's probably, maybe there's two, and like Richmond's not that far away. I'll get a note from somebody like,
yeah.
4.
yeah, like what are you talking about?
Yeah.
But there is, and same thing, it is incredibly expensive, and so it does become where the accessibility of those things, but the accessibility of the information alone is so bad right now that's what I'm trying to figure out. And then
Along those lines, sorry to interrupt, but having children, I thought it was I still think it's fascinating reading like children's books and how much animals are incorporated into children's literature. And in older children's literature, like in nursery rhymes and stuff, there's a lot of references to like where pigs are going, to market.
This little piggy went to market.
Yeah, I wrote that one too. But in those is the implied, like, this pig is going to be eaten or going to market.
It was raised for a purpose.
Now it's your pet.
But in current children's literature, that subject is not
and a
broached.
personality.
Yeah.
It's a sense of humor.
Yeah.
We anthropomorphize.
Yes.
100%.
And for me, I don't know if it is this work, but Charlotte's Web felt like the work when I was a kid, where it was like, oh man, this pig's gonna...
Yeah, this spider has feelings.
Yeah.
This pig has feelings.
This pig now has a voice because the spider is speaking for it. Like, that was one of the ones where it's like, it made you stop and think, oh yeah, do I want to, should I be eating this? But before that, I don't know if that was like, I haven't read all of children's books, but I think it's just interesting that back in the day, those nursery rhymes were much more ingrained in the culture of agriculture.
Baba Black Sheep,
and a lot of that stuff is understandable. You read some of it now, like I had to explain a lot of it to my kids when I was reading it, and they've lived on a farm. Some of it was still not second knowledge to them.
And this is where I get into things about sympathy versus empathy. You see it in nonprofits too. There are people that feel bad for others, and then people that relate to others. And with animals, same thing. People start feeling bad for, and they don't realize the relationship. I've wanted to take it even further. Like put googly eyes on tomatoes and then cut them off the vine and have them scream or something. You can take it so far with all of it, but it is like, what are you taking out and what are you giving back? And it's a tough relationship right now. I will talk to vegetarians and I will hang out and I will feed and whatever. Veganism, I have harder times with.
Yeah.
But it's, again, when I ask people, like, well, what do you think the symbiotic relationship is between plants and animals and the planet? And if the answer is very emotional, I kind of just go like, I'm not feeding you. I'm sorry. Like, but it's tough. It's tough to draw those lines and to respect like how people feel about it.
Well, it's also hard to raise rice and couscous in Ohio. So there's the very real, almost geopolitical collateral damage that is importing everything from across the planet for every one of your meals. Sorry.
No, but
that is real. Like it is a real thing. If you have chosen to not eat animal products and you're only going to eat grains and fruits, most of those fruits, if you live in North America, are going to be tropical or subtropical and brought from across the planet. And if it's that way for every single meal, mercy. Like we've just created problems that we cannot solve.
Not to mention, I always bring up how many groundhogs or other animals in the process of like harvesting avocados for a year.
Oh, for sure.
How many, but anyways, it's just, and again, it's understanding there's a whole system. You can't isolate it to one thing. But what I do find though is food is the greatest conduit, quickest way to anyone's heart is through their stomach, right? And it cultivates community, and that's what farming, ag in general, sharing tools or whatever else, all the way down to making a big table and sharing that, which leads into, so how does the act of butchery serve as a form of community in a world that distances itself from the process?
Well, the way we do it is not necessarily like what most people think of as butchery, because when we're doing it, Doug and I don't butcher things at the table by ourselves. There's always other people there. And they might just be chatting with us, but in these cases with our workshops, there are people working there with us because they want to learn what we know, and so it's like constant engagement between us. So I wanted to clarify that because butchery as we do it is not product oriented. It's more communal oriented. Like this can be a fun activity.
For example,
the best sound bite.
Children playing, frolicking in the field.
I forget the rest of your question.
I know. Sorry, that was such timing. That was great. It could be if you would have just said it could be fun. But more to do with how do these workshops then too in a simpler form? How do these workshops bring people together? Do you guys see community coming out of that?
Well, what happens actually because of the time and place that we live, a fair amount of our demographic are self-professed preppers and folks that want to prepare for the worst case scenario, whatever that might be. That may be a time where they can no longer get meat at the grocery store. It may be a time where the grid has gone down and they need to know how to preserve meat without using a deep freeze, whatever it is. So a fair amount of our demographic are folks that are preparing for the worst. And as a byproduct of that self-reliance is also a individualism that is hyper-exclusive. They want to be isolated in this new world that they're creating in their mind. And Andy and I do our absolute best to discourage moving into this direction autonomously. No shame on you. You should always invite people into this process. You should always turn it into a learning experience, whether it's because you know something that your local neighbors don't know, or you're equipping people that don't know a skill that you feel is important or valuable. And then, as he mentioned, like you shouldn't have to do it by yourself. Like this should be communally, prescient and possible every single time. Every single time. Like, don't ever do this with every workshop. So if I had to do this by myself, we're like, don't do that. Don't do that. Don't do this by yourself.
And it's fun. You said they're preparing for like the worst case, and then they come to something, and we're trying to show them the best case. People doing this together, enjoying each other's company, having a good time.
Living with a charcuterie spread that no one could ever afford.
They're trying to plan for the worst, and we're showing them
hoping for the best.
The best. So,
I like that. And it's also rugged individualism is a tough leather to crack. And that's tied in with kind of the culture of the area. I talk to people all the time about, I just did yesterday too, like, I'm not trying to be a prepper, I'm just trying to be prepared. And the reality of it is I know I have to be prepared for my neighbors.
Yeah.
Because everyone's going to show up just being like, I don't know how to start a fire.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, we're not going to go that far back. All right, so a couple last things on here too I just want to make sure to touch on is, how does the journey of an animal from going from pasture to plate embody values of respect? It seems like there was a lot of this in the workshop.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, it's like intrinsic what we're doing. When someone, it starts with the poem and everything that we do at the beginning. We slow down and let everyone appreciate that what we're doing is not light work. And it has some gravity. And when you're there for that part of it, then it makes perfect sense to capture the blood, because this pig is dying and the blood is going to come out of it. And then it makes sense to use the head and to scrape it so that you can use the skin. And that just goes continually down the line, because everyone here saw that pig die. They saw how it died with respect. And it doesn't make any sense to waste it further down the line, because we were all present. We paused to recognize what was happening. And from that point on, it kind of sets the groundwork for respect the whole way through. And then there are tidbits of our knowledge that help people realize, no, you should eat this, and this is how. So we give them the possibility and the information, hopefully, to realize that they can use all of it, and it can all be fantastically delicious all the way through. So when you combine the reverence with delicious, it just encourages more people, or the people of these workshops at least, to go deeper and to utilize everything.
Andy, delicious reverence.
We should call our workshops
Delicious reverence. I kind of like that.
That's pretty good. Yeah.
Anything to add for you about the respect aspect?
Well, I would just say that, like, butchering as a skill set, or the culinary arts as a skill set, is kind of independent. Like, that can be done in the home kitchen without an animal.
Mm-hmm.
That's a part of what we do, but we don't work in a vacuum. Like, we come to farms, or people come to our farm, and there's an animal out in the field or in the woods, and that animal, whether it was raised by me or by our hosts here, like, it was thoughtfully done. It was like there was respect from the moment that breed was selected by them, or the person that they called and said, hey, do you have any piglets? And every day, they made sure that pig was safe and healthy and contented in the woods with its other pigs and its other food, and the fence is intact, and there's plenty of water, and all the respect that goes into the final product starts months and months and months ago. And from that trajectory, right up until the moment that we pause, and the way that we place our shot, and the fact that we capture the blood for food, like, everything is done to honor the animal and the good people that raised it, turned it into food for them and their families and communities.
So for me, I very much appreciate what you guys do, because it's practical education, things that you can actually take, and hopefully my idea, because I watch everybody kind of like from an outside perspective sometimes, I'm wondering, how many ambassadors did you just create?
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
And that's a good feeling. What do you hope for or envision the future of butchery education to be?
Well, I mean, to be honest, when we started, we went around, like, planting prosciutto seeds all over the country. We would go and do a workshop someplace, and we'd have a leg on cure, on salt, ready to be enjoyed for later use, a year, 2, 3 years later. And we went around just planting these prosciutto seeds everywhere. And we knew in doing that, we were not just inspiring those people to do this again, they're not going to be able to eat this by themselves. Like there's going to be collateral impact, and so that part of it is just simply that. Like we're creating this abundance and delicacy that just cannot be bought. And there's also the sense of self-respect and pride that you did this. Like you raised this animal, and you've got this to show for it and share. And there's something really just profound about that to me.
Yeah, and it's all very thoughtful. It's not flippant or get her done sort of mentality, which there are times where that is perfectly perfect as a way to work. I think the way we do it and what we're trying to get across to other people is that it's okay to take a moment and think about what you want to do, or it's okay to make this more delicious in some way. While it's fine to like butcher a pig and turn it all into sausage, there are all of these other options. You know, I've unfortunately been around people, I know Doug has been too, where it's let's get this pig shot so we can cut it up sort of mentality, which does produce food and can nourish people. But it is the slightly slower, more thoughtful approach that we prefer, because it will allow people to think about what they're doing in other places of their life. Whereas most people don't think about taking 3 days to butcher one pig, especially people like my grandparents. That was not an option as far as time and energy goes. But we like doing it because it slows everything down, and it gives people a chance to realize that if they put a little bit of thought and a little bit of attention into things, they can end up with a better product at the end. That they then, again, would share with their friends over many years, hopefully.
Last question. What is it you think that you leave people with when you do these?
I'd say the biggest one is probably, even though I hesitate to say it, I think it's inspiration. And I don't know if that's ever been our main goal. But when they start with a big pig or a live pig out in the woods, and they end up eating cured meat that's of extremely high quality, and they see all the things we did in between, and none of what we do is really a mystery. It's all knowable. And we do it on a weekend, so people are like, sure, yeah, I can do this. I want to do this. I want to go have pigs, or I want to go to my local butcher and try to make a prosciutto with a ham that I get from them. I think that's probably one of the biggest ones they're left with. And there's
Every once in a while, actually more times than not, I would say, there's a workshop like this one where one or two of the separate parties that are there agree that next time this happens, they're going to be there for it. And, I mean, agrarian community doesn't happen in the U.S. like it used to.
No.
And if you're a small-scale producer, you're probably an independent one. And if you're a large-scale producer, you're on a $1 million piece of machinery with GPS. And nowhere in between there do you need to call on your neighbor for assistance.
Yeah.
And this is a very unique scenario in agriculture where everyone is benefited by calling on one another and showing up.
I like that one. That's what I was going to say was it seems people pay for and come for autonomy, but they leave with abundance.
Yeah, and community, hopefully. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And a number of abundance in different ways, but that autonomy is the initial feeling, and then it kind of spreads out.
Yeah.
Dig what you guys do. Thanks for doing this too.
Sure.
I appreciate it. I'll make something cool out of it.
All right. Appreciate it.
It will be cool if you did.
A lot cooler if you did.